Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about calories and energy balance, understanding, what's involved in prescribing, an amount of calories for a person and understanding, when a client has particular goals, like how we would go about, manipulating things like energy balance to drive the adaptations that we want. Now we spoke about macronutrients and the importance of each individual macronutrient as roles for health and obviously for performance and certain goals. So now what we're going to do is add another layer to that and go, all right, well, if we understand these macros, we understand what they do and the roles that they fulfill within physiology and people's individual goals. How do we now, work the calorie equation into the scenario? How do we manipulate things like energy balance to start getting these specific outcomes, or teaching our clients about these things so that they can go off and start implementing some certain strategies with their nutrition, understanding a little bit more in terms of education to get the desired outcomes that you guys have been hired for. Now, when it comes to calories, we're talking about energy. So energy that we're consuming in this particular module from the diet. So most foods, if not every food, has an energy value that it yields. And we use the term calories or kilojoules, depending on where you are, as the unit of energy that describes the amount of energy that that particular food is going to give us. Now, it's important to understand that we have an energy requirement as human beings just to function. Our body is energy taxing just to breathe, beat the heart, think, use the brain, regenerate cells, those kind of things. So we need to understand that consuming an amount of calories just to maintain physiological function is important. And then we've got to think about the other things that we do, like activity and like maybe adaptations to training, and start to grasp this concept of like calories really are the elixir of life for a human being. If we don't have calories, we have a mechanism where our body can go and find some long-term energy storage and maybe convert some fat to fuel, or convert some glycogen, or at a very last resort break down proteins and stuff. But at some point that is a finite resource, and if we have an absence of calories in the diet, and we do that for a prolonged period of time, we can start to see some really serious health complications. So it's important to understand, like, we need calories just to survive, as well as perform and recover. Now, when we talk about macronutrients, which we did in the previous video, and we're tying this into calories, we've got these three macros that we, want to make majority of our food choices up of, they make majority of the food choices outside of fiber. Now, each individual macro, protein, carbs, and fats, will yield a certain amount of energy per unit of 1 gram as the measurement we'll use. Now, when it comes to protein, that'll yield 4 calories per 1 gram. So for example, 20 grams of protein would be, 80 calories. Carbohydrates are the same. So we've got 4 calories per gram again. So that same, I guess, like 20 grams of carbs would be 80 calories as well. And then we've got a dietary fat, which is, 2 and a bit times denser in terms of energy than carbs and protein, at 9 calories per gram. And then I guess if we wanted to talk about something like alcohol, that sits somewhere in the middle at about 7 calories per gram. So it is a little bit denser in terms of energy as well. So we need to consider that too if we're consuming some of that in the diet along with everything else. Now, tying that into a concept called energy balance. So energy balance is basically the relationship between the flux of energy coming in the system with us consuming food and drink against the energy expenditure going out of the system through activity. Now, activity can be, just us general movement. It can be prescribed exercise. But basically, we've got a relationship between the energy coming in and the energy coming out. Now, that relationship and those environments can really start to influence our body composition and or our performance. So when we talk about energy balance, there's really 3 distinct environments that can influence our bodies in very different ways. Now, some of you are going to be very familiar with this, but if we've got something like a neutral energy balance, that's when we kind of eat the same amount of energy in terms of calories, and we expend through activity and, I guess, planned training and just normal physiological function. Now, that can be a really advantageous time or environment to create for a beginner client, someone who's trying to recomposition their body because they're new to training so they can put some muscle on, burn some fat at the same time, or a performance or strength athlete who has, a performance-based goal that's not really that interested in anything else. We need to make sure that we're feeding the system, giving an adequate supply for performance, recovery, like physiological function as well. So that can be some of the scenarios that we would want to see a neutral energy balance applied, to a client or yourselves. Next up, we have a positive energy balance. So a positive energy balance is when the energy being consumed into the system through calories and food and drink is higher than the energy being expended out through planned activity, physiology, and training. So that would generally lead to weight gain. Now, what weight you gain of muscle and fat is going to be influenced on a lot of things: how you train, what the composition of your diet is in terms of your macros, your genetics, those kind of things. But generally, if we're in a positive energy balance, we're in a surplus of energy, we would generally see weight gain happen. And this is one of the environments that we do want to create for someone like a strength athlete who's trying to put on a bit of muscle size. It's definitely an environment that is anabolic. We've got extra resources in terms of calories and obviously adequate protein when we talk about macronutrient distribution to, create more tissue and facilitate recovery in the energetically costly process of making more lean tissue. So, in general, that's kind of the scenarios that we would like to see that. But a lot of people put themselves in positive energy balances all the time, especially clients. Maybe they're not aware of it. Maybe they don't realize. And in a lot of cases, when people aren't training meticulously and their plan's not set up in a certain way, they are going to see an increase in body fat gain because there's excess energy going through the system. If it's not being burnt or used as ATP, it's being stored, and it's being stored as body fat. And we have a very, very fascinating system that can store calories in terms of fat, and it can store fat in terms of into fat cells, and it can actually replicate fat cells in an infinite basis and fill those up over and over and over again as a long-term energy supply. That's obviously unfavorable from an aesthetic standpoint, but when it comes to survival and the mechanisms that our body has for survival, it's actually a really fascinating system when you think about it. But obviously we're trying to mitigate that, with managing our clients and their goals. Like, I don't know many people who need to get essentially higher in terms of body fat percentage. There's certainly acute communities that do, but generally, we don't really have problems doing that. We need to make our clients very aware of this. And the last environment that we wanted to talk about, which is probably the most common one, it's probably the one that's most sought out, I guess, from a goals perspective for clients, especially when you're newer to training and you're kind of working with the general population. And that's a negative energy balance. So that is when we're in a deficit. So we're expending more energy through activity, training, physiological demands of, physiological energy demands, then we're consuming through food and drink in the diet. Now, the goal here is to generally drive weight loss, or what will happen here is generally we will drive weight loss. We can obviously drive fat loss. We can manipulate training and macronutrient distribution to a degree to try our best to mitigate the amount of catabolism to things like lean muscle tissue and those kind of things to keep the aesthetics and the strength and all of those things. But the main goal here for most people the main outcome that's going to happen mechanistically is we're going to lose body weight. Now, a lot of people are going to, maybe come into a scenario where they think they're in a deficit of energy. They think they're driving a negative energy balance. They're not achieving weight loss. They're not achieving the fat loss that they wanted or whatever. And generally, I guess when you look at things mechanistically, if someone's not losing weight, by definition, they're not in an energy deficit. They're not in an energy deficient state. And, we even need to look at the relationship, look at the accuracy of their tracking, look at what's going on with their activity and those kind of things. Because I guess when we talk about things in terms of fat loss and mechanisms to our body's mechanisms to combat those things, which we'll talk about in another video, it's one of the things that our body will do once it starts to, identify that the body is getting smaller and it's breaking itself down, is it will start to slow down the process of us expending energy. We'll sit more, get more efficient at burning calories, or getting more activity out for the calories burned. It'll slow us down slightly metabolically, those kind of things. So we just need to understand that, especially coaching with our clients, because I guess using calculators on the internet, following a specific diet, maybe making mistakes in terms of tracking and stuff. People think they're in a deficit and they're not achieving the goals that they want. When generally, I guess, like by definition, you've got to think about it like if they're not losing weight, they're not in a deficit here. Okay, so now we've talked about macros, we've talked about the calories, we talked about energy balance, we talked about these three distinct scenarios and what you can expect to, I guess, like, deal with in terms of your clients and the goals and stuff. Now what we want to do is have a think about, well, how do we come up with an individual energy requirement for somebody? Now, it's important to understand all of the working variables within the equations so that we get an understanding of the moving parts here. So the first thing to do is we need to understand or look for or acquire someone's basal metabolic rate. Now, basal metabolic rate basically refers to the amount of energy our body needs at rest. So it means that if I was in a sleeping position for X amount of time, how much calories would my body need to sustain that system, I guess, to maintain homeostasis? So that's going to be significantly less if I was just inactive kind of sleeping. But think about it, like our brains are still working, our heart's still working, our lungs are still working. We're still kind of moving around and stuff, moving in bed, rotating, twitching from dreams and stuff like that. All of those things require energy forms of calories. Now, how to obtain a basal metabolic rate number for a person? There's many different formulas and calculators out there. The goal is to take a formula, something like the Harris-Benedict formula, maybe the newer updated version, and just get an idea. Put your physical characteristics into it. You got to put your weight, your height, your age, your biological sex has a different formula just for that particular one, for example. And then it'll come out with a figure. So just use myself, for example. If I put my height, weight, and my age and all that stuff in, it'll probably come out at about 1,750, 1,800 calories. Now, what that means is that I would need to consume 1,800 calories to make sure that my body stays, at the same mass it is now in a resting state. Now, it's important to understand that this is a hypothetical starting point. Now, because everything's done based off like research, and we know that people are different. We know there's outliers, this and that. So what we need to do is just have this starting point and then think about, how can we make it a little bit more personalized and reflect on the results and manipulate things in the future to make them, I guess, a little bit more calibrated for the individual. But before we do that, we need to think, well, BMR is just me resting. And like I spoke about before, it doesn't take into consideration activity and training, because activity is just me doing things like this right now. I'm in a standing desk, I'm moving around, I've got my hands, I'm talking, I've been walking around, I'm walking the dogs, I've gone to the shops, all of those kind of things. I might have an active job, obviously not me, but someone else might, they might be digging holes and carrying wood and, building stuff and all kinds of things. So we've got to take that into consideration when we talk about how much energy someone could burn over a day. Now, what we're looking for here is someone's total daily energy expenditure. And what we can do is add a total daily energy expenditure multiplier. Now, there's a little bit of a table and a reference point to go off because, I guess, again, someone somewhere, some scientists, some researchers have done some really good work and gone, okay, so, if you're a sedentary worker who does some small to light exercise, your BMR multiplier is probably going to be between 1.4 and 1.7. So you're going to burn, let's say, my 1,800 calories that I've got at BMR, and I'm probably going to burn, if I do some light exercise and I'm quite sedentary, between 1.4 times that and 1.7. So we can kind of get this little bit of a buffer and come to a hypothetical starting point for someone's energy expenditure through that, or total daily energy values. Now, the multiplier can move up and down from there. So we can go moderate exercise. Obviously, the multiplier is going to go up. We can go heavy exercise, and then we can go down. So I've just got the table up here. So we use the human energy requirements table from the World Health Organization, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. So we've used that table as our physical activity multiplier that we add onto the BMR, and that comes out to a total figure. So what it's taking into consideration is someone's BMR, their non-activity thermogenesis or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So like I talked about, the movement stuff, the activity that just happens from, non-planned exercise. And then as well as that, the training exercise induced thermogenesis. So energy expended through training, lifting weights, doing cardio, those kind of things. All of those things are going to, whether they're mixed together in a combination or differently, are going to add up to a different amount of total energy expended for a person. Now, when we talk about how this, I guess, looks for something like fat loss, which I spoke about before in terms of the adaptations, we're actually going to unpack that in a different video and go into the weeds on like how we would coach that process. But what I want you guys to understand is that we understand BMR, we understand total daily energy expenditure. We've used these algorithms that have been, I guess, refined through scientific research for decades. And now we've got a hypothetical starting point where you can go, right, Jason, you roughly burn at rest around 3,555 calories. What we're going to understand is that it's a hypothetical starting point. We're going to try and implement that and manage some metrics to see if that happens. And what we're going to do in the next video is coach you guys on how that process happens. Okay, I've spoken enough in this video. Hopefully you guys understand kind of where we're going with this and, kind of all the parts that lead on to coaching nutrition for clients individually and their goals. Hope you liked the video. Make sure you hit the link in the description, make your way to our website, go through some of the other resources, articles, even watch some of the other videos, all dedicated towards coaches, upskilling and being better at delivering outcomes for their clients and their business. If you haven't given yourself a free business health check, take the scorecard on the website. It'll give you guys some ideas on like where your business is strong and maybe some places where you might need to put some work in. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next video. See you next time.